Okay, with Daniel 8, we have a change in language. Chapters 2 through 7 were written in Aramaic. And we've noted why 2 through 7, in some ways, really belong together. That there's some structures, some parallelism that exists among those chapters, particularly between chapters 2 and 7, 3 and 6, and 4 and 5 with that chiastic structure we mentioned briefly. So there's a change, though, in Daniel 8 to Hebrew. I think that is significant because I think the purpose of the revelations beginning with chapter 8 and following, while there's some commonality and some threads that run through all of this, obviously there are messages here that may have a different audience, a unique audience in mind, whereas we can see that Daniel 2 through 7, particularly 2 through 6, are visions that were given to Babylonian kings. In chapters 8 through 12, these are visions that are given to God's people, to certainly a prominent prophet among the people for the sake of the people, to give them vital information about things that will happen in future days. With the vision in chapter 7, not to rehash that, but we can see some of God's purposes for the vision of chapter 7, how it contrasts with chapter 2. Remember, chapter 2 was a vision to Nebuchadnezzar, and the imagery used there was appropriate for that purpose with the statue and the materials of construction, whereas in chapter 7, if you see that more as a vision given primarily to God's people about things happening in future days, the imagery changed to what? From metals and clay to what? Fearsome beasts, particularly the fourth beast, a terrifying beast. You know, it was superlatives piling on top of one another to describe the terror. That's informative because one of the things that communicates is that in future days, things will be fear. There will be many potential sources of fear. God's people are going to live in difficult times. They are going to live under the thumb of the rule of terrifying rulers and be subject to their whims, and at times will be oppressed by them. But the overarching comfort, again, with reference to the main theme of the book of Daniel, is to remind them in a special way of God's sovereignty, His control over the nations. And that I appreciate, the brother alluding to the events of yesterday. Regardless of the outcome, I find it truly a blessing that we've been able to study this book together at this time. We are all in need of the theme of the book of Daniel. Well, in Daniel chapter 8, another change from chapter 7 is that not only do we have a change of language, but we have a change of perspective. Daniel, at least 2 through 7, I'd have to go back and look at 1, are told from a third-person point of view. It's told about Daniel. You flip back to chapter 7, in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream, written as if someone else's, we believe Daniel compiled this and wrote it, but it's written from a different perspective. But then in chapter 8, in the third year of the reign of Belshazzar the king, a vision appeared to me, Daniel. And so going forward, we're going to see a lot of this first person narration. And so these visions, chapter 7, again, chapter 7 is much of a bridge as anything between the first half of the book and the last half of the book. So we have more visions, more animals in chapter 8, and we're going to see how that fits in side by side with chapter 7, with chapter 2, and how this is going to fit. We'll come to appreciate later how chapter 8 helps prepare us for, say, a chapter like chapter 11, when we get into studying chapter 11. So I'd like a volunteer to read for us in Daniel chapter 8. We have mics here at the back. If someone could raise their hand. Oh, Steve, right there. Verses 1 through 8, brother. Daniel 8, verses 1 through 8.
Daniel 8, verses 1 through 8. In the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me. Daniel, after that, which appeared to me at the first. And I saw in the vision, and when I saw, I was in Susa, the capital, which is in the province of Elam. And I saw in the vision, and I was at the Ulai canal. I raised my eyes and saw, and behold, a ram standing on the back of the canal. It had 2 horns, and both horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. I saw the ram charging westward and northward and southward. No beast could stand before him, and there was no one who could rescue him from his power. He did as he pleased and became great. As I was considering, behold, a male goat came from the west across the face of the whole earth without touching the ground. And the goat had a conspicuous horn between his eyes. He came to the ram with the 2 horns, which I had seen standing on the brink of the bank of the canal. And he ran at him in his powerful wrath. I saw him come close to the ram, and he was enraged against him and struck the ram and broke his 2 horns. And the ram had no power to stand before him, but he cast him down to the ground and trampled on him. And there was no one who could rescue the ram from his power. Then the goat became exceedingly great, but when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and instead of it there came up 4 conspicuous horns toward the 4 winds of heaven.
Okay. Let's be reminded, thank you, Steve, that 7 and 8, in some ways, we kind of think of these as maybe a single unit, but they may have different purposes to them. But they're couched in here in the Babylonian section of history between chapters 4 and 5, and that 20-plus year period between Nebuchadnezzar's, the conclusion of his reign, and where we find Daniel in chapter 5, say, during the end of Babylonian dominance in the reign of Belshazzar. And so in that period, and we pointed that out last week, this is a period where maybe Daniel, in terms of being visible in the kingdom, is maybe not as visible, but there's plenty going on. And when he appears before Belshazzar, again, as we noted last week, he's armed with the terrifying / comforting knowledge from the visions of chapters 7 and 8, and I think plays no small part in emboldening him to speak the way he does to Belshazzar. Okay? Now, one of the blessings we have in chapter 8 is that in verses 20 through 22, we have some divine commentary. The angel Gabriel is commissioned to explain we get very clear understanding. We're provided with some very specific answers to what some of the big things in what Steve just read signify, okay? But before we get into and that's a real help, isn't it? Right? The ram represents the Medes and the Persians. The goat represents Greece, the kingdom of Greece. So, which are the 2nd and 3rd kingdoms in this progression we've now gone through a couple of different times in chapters 2 and 7. But before we dive into the deep details, I just want us to take these images and just look at them as separate pictures almost, and just see what broadly these pictures commend to us. So, I've told you before I'm a visual learner, and I told you about a website where somebody offered this. This guy did some really great artwork on these visions, a lot better job than I could have done, and it really helps me to try to, because regardless of whether you have something like this or not, one of the things we have to do as readers is to paint these pictures in our mind. And usually the first impression we give of the picture gets us a long way toward understanding the purpose for the picture at all. So, the first thing that Daniel envisions is this ram. And what are we told about this ram in verses 3 and 4. He's standing by the Ulai Canal in Elam, east of Babylon. And so we begin to paint that picture, and we're told some things about this ram of particular interest. What are some of the things we're told about the ram? Okay, it has 2 horns, but one of them is longer than the other. Now, if I could just ask you to, we're going to jump ahead just a bit. Since this signifies the Medes and the Persians, you remember back in chapter 7, what image was used to represent the kingdom of the Medes and Persians in the vision of chapter 7? The bear raised up on one side. And I don't know how you envision that. One possibility is that he's raising up in a position to strike. The other possibility that you could think of is that maybe, I'm not going to act this out, but it's kind of out of balance. One side is higher than the other. That does look a little bit strange, but there's a purpose for that unique feature there. There are some distinctions between the Medes and the Persians. The Medes are the older empire, but what about the Persians? They're more what? What? They're fiercer, more powerful. They will rise up later, but will become the more powerful of the two. So again, this general note about the relationship between these two kingdoms is revealed in 2 different ways, in the description of the bear and then here in the description of the ram. What else are we told about the ram? We're told the 2 horns were long. One is longer than the other, with the longer one coming up last. Verse 4, what is this ram? How is it behaving?
It's moving hither, thither, and yon, going in every direction.
Okay.
Just trying to get influence over everything it sees.
Almost every direction. I'll agree to hither, thither, and yon if hither, thither, and yon means westward, northward, and southward. What direction is it not moving in? Why? Because it comes from the east. I want you to think about the Persians and think of the center of reference. Persians would come from which direction with regard to the beautiful land? From the east, okay? This is really trying to get us so we're actually, I have a purpose for putting the ram over here because, ladies and gentlemen, all of you tonight are viewing toward the north. And so he sees a ram, and this ram, beyond the directions noted, what is it doing in all of those directions? Don't make me act it out. It's pushing. That's a mild way of putting it. Mine says butting, right? Well, yours says pushing. Okay, so we'll agree. He's pushing very hard. Pushing. The ram was butting westward, northward, and southward. No other beast could stand before him. I mean, give me a sense of the temperament of this beast, this ram. Aggressive, hostile, loves to engage. Bring it on, right? I mean, if you had a set of horns like that, and somebody raises up against you, you'd think, I got something for you, right? And so it has an aggressive posture about it, and for a period of time is victorious in every conflict, right? It has its day. No one could be rescued from his power. Now notice, he did as he pleased and magnified himself. Boy, is that not a common thread in these different chapters we're studying in Daniel? Here you have a world power, a particular ruler, and that's the general thought, right? Look at me. Here's what I've done. I do as I please. I magnify myself. Nebuchadnezzar learned that's not a good posture to be in. And now here's another kingdom taking that same orientation of heart, of mind, same attitude. Okay? So this ram has its day. Then we're introduced to the goat. All right, so this is a picture of strength. This is a picture of aggression. Okay? By the way, what else I'm just throwing this out. I don't have any particular answer in mind. Isn't it interesting, described as a bear, chapter 7, a ram, chapter 8. You could see some commonalities there, also some differences, which says there's a different purpose for this, right? I find that just as a student, if I were putting myself in Daniel's position, I mean, chapter 7 would be about as terrifying as it gets, right? I mean, one beast so terrifying, I can't even compare it to anything I know in nature. Just call it the fourth monster, the monster beast, right? Terrifying. And in that vision, there's a lot of focus on that beast and on what the Ancient of Days, eternal, been here a lot longer than that beast, will be here after that beast, and defeats that beast. That's comforting. You take the fiercest kingdom that could exist on the earth, God still wins. So with that in view, 2 years later, now he dreams of a ram. I mean, after you've had the vision in chapter 7, this one, I don't know, wouldn't it be easier? I don't know. Maybe you disagree. Okay, so let's talk about the goat. So now here's this goat. And you can see from the picture that there's a distinguishing feature of this goat. Verse 5, he's a male goat coming from, now where's he coming from? The west. The ram came from, the ram came from the east. And so if you're looking at the map, he's coming from the east, and he would butt northward and westward and southward, okay? And then from the west comes this goat. Now, it's inevitable. You've got two freight trains heading toward one another. I'm not going to turn that into a math problem. You know, we already know there's going to be impact here. This goat is described, he's coming from the west over the surface of the whole earth. And then what does it say about him? Just trying to get the picture. He didn't touch the ground. So what does that communicate to you? Now we're not talking, a still shot wouldn't capture that, would it? We need a motion picture. Speed, lots of it. Interesting. What was this kingdom, how was it depicted in chapter 7? Leopard with 4 wings. A leopard by itself is a pretty fast animal. Could you imagine giving a leopard 4 wings on top of that? I mean, there is a commonality here of swiftness, right? Probably the ability to overtake, catch someone unprepared, and that's part of how they want to get in, attack quickly, and overwhelm and overcome, and that's how they roll. So you have a stubborn, full of himself ram with 2 horns. I mean, maybe the ram's saying, okay, you hurt this horn, I still got another one. And then there's this other one that goes in one direction as fast as he can. Conflict is going to come. And we know from the text the goat is going to emerge triumphant. You know, even if we didn't have the interpretation in verses 20 through 22, we would at least know this. These 2 kingdoms have to succeed one another. One comes after the other. So if you were looking at this succession of 4 kingdoms. This is either the first and second one, it's the second and third, or the third and fourth. Well, we know it's the second and third one because of other information. This goat, not at all afraid of the ram. Verse 6, verse 5, this conspicuous horn you can see on the screen between his eyes. So he's feeling pretty good about himself. Comes up to the ram that has the 2 horns, which I had seen standing in front of the canal, rushed at him in his mighty wrath. So there's rushing, there's rage. Verse 7, strikes the ram, shatters his 2 horns, and so the ram has no strength to withstand him, hurls him to the ground and tramples on him, and there's none to rescue the ram from his power. And so one kingdom, this is describing the end of one kingdom and the rising of another. So here's this picture of this, however you would paint this in your mind, of these 2 beasts rushing at one another, and we know that the goat is going to emerge victorious. And the ram will have both of its horns broken off, as you can see right here. But it also says that he didn't have a picture of the goat trampling the ram, so I didn't bother to try to find one. But there's a lot to envision, isn't there? Doesn't that enrich your understanding that just by these images of animals, God is communicating a lot about the character of these kingdoms, about their manner, their posture, and ultimately what's going to happen? And again, there is such detail in a chapter like chapter 8, and especially in chapter 11. This gets down to a question of, how does Daniel know this? Now, liberal scholars have an answer to that. Daniel has to be written sometime after 150, 165 BC. They're going to run into some trouble, though, with that view, because there's archaeological evidence that suggests Daniel existed well before that time. The Old Testament was translated into Greek before that, well before that time. So this is a text that is very affirming in terms of our faith in Scripture. And so there's comfort for God's people of every generation. Okay, so to summarize, we forgot verse 8. We're told a little bit more about this male goat. He magnified himself exceedingly. So he's got some swag about him too. And what happens to the goat? The horn is broken off. We're not told how the horn is broken off, but what would a horn symbolize in biblical prophecy? Power, rule. So what then would you see this large horn as representing? Even we've seen this imagery already. The 4th beast had 10 horns. What would those horns signify? Rulers. So there is this prominent ruler in the Greek kingdom. I wonder who that could be. And what happens to the horn? It is broken off. So the horn's gone. But in its place, 4 smaller horns. They're not going to be as prominent. Now he really looks ugly. 4 conspicuous horns oriented toward the 4 winds of heaven. Okay, that's some imagery there, isn't it? That's a lot to take in. But there are themes and lessons that come out of this. Okay? So, and I think all of this is the setup for where this vision is really headed, and that's the discussion of a horn that's going to emerge from one of these 4. And yes, wait till you see the picture of that one. It's all over the place. Okay, so there's a summary of verses 1 through 8. Any additional insights about those pictures? Not so much about what you think of the artist. Okay.
It's about dominance and without fear.
Yeah. The nations meaning the nations have dominance, but God's people don't have fear. Because, who is foretold about, this is now the third time in Daniel we've been told about the coming of the Medes and Persians and the Greeks. God understands his people need comfort. God doesn't, we have this as a source of comfort for us, but there are other sources of comfort. God doesn't have to tell us what will come in the days ahead of us using pictures like this. We have plenty here to understand he's in control, and from that derive comfort for our age, that he's in control. But yeah, there's dominance without fear. Though the nations may rise and fall, and God's people be easy to say in a comfortable environment like this, yet we take comfort in knowing our God is in control of all. Okay, so that brings us then to verses 9 through 14. Okay, would somebody read that for us? 9 through 14. We have Curtis over here. Thank you, brother. Mike is almost there.
And out of one of them came forth a rather small horn, and it grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the beautiful land, when it grew up to the host of heaven, and caused some of the host and some of the stars to fall to the earth. And it trampled them down, and even magnified itself to be equal with the commander of the host. And it removed the regular sacrifice from him, and the place of his sanctuary was thrown down. And on account of transgression, the host will be given over to the horn along with the regular sacrifice, and it will throw down truth to the ground and do its will and succeed. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to the particular one who was speaking, how long will the vision about the regular sacrifice apply while the transgression causes desolation, so as to allow both the holy place and the host to be trampled? And he said to them, for 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the holy place will be made righteous.
Okay, thank you, Curtis. All right, so we also are going to see that there is some interpretation provided from heaven in verses 23 through 26 regarding what Curtis just read. I would like to go back to verses 20 through 22, though, and just kind of set ourselves up to pick up here with this small horn that ends up being not so small. Verse 20, the ram which you saw with the two horns represents the kings of Media and Persia. Verse 21, the shaggy goat represents the kingdom of Greece, and the large horn that is between his eyes is what? The first king of the kingdom of Greece. Historically, we understand that to be Alexander the Great, okay? Alexander the Great came from west to east, from Greece. I believe his kingdom went all the way over to India. Okay, yeah. And in a very short period of time, son of Philip II of Macedon. In a very short period of time, that's consistent with the theme of swiftness, okay, and strength. And so Alexander conquered the world, and then subsequently, very soon after, died around age 32 or 33, and he dies without an heir. And we'll come to that in just a second. But that is helpful to us before we can understand what these four horns are going to be, much less the horn that comes out of one of those four. We're provided with this information here that is helpful to us. Okay, so the fact that the first prominent horn is broken signifies the downfall of that ruler. The best fit there is the death of Alexander. And historically, we know that after Alexander's death, that his kingdom was divided up among four of his generals. And you'll notice in verse 22, the broken horn and the four horns that arose in its place represent four kingdoms which will arise from his nation, although not with his power, okay? As I understand it, a general named Cassander ruled over Macedonia. I'm not going to pronounce this right. Lysimachus. Is that close enough, Curtis? Ruled over Thrace and Asia Minor. Then you have Ptolemy. The Ptolemies would be a line of kings that would rule in Egypt. And then the Seleucid kings, Seleucus, ruled in Syria. Syria and Egypt become the two important ones, especially in chapter 11. And if you think of where is Israel positioned with regard to Syria and Egypt? Right in between them, okay? So Syria would be in what direction relative to the beautiful land, which I think is referring to Canaan there? Syria would be east of Canaan? North. More north than anything else. Yeah, north and a little bit east, but largely north. And you'll notice here that, and so, here, let's go to the next slide. Oh, so there's just kind of a summary of chapters 2, 7, and 8. You see that horn there? That's the so-called small horn. Here's a close-up. Will you look at that thing? It comes out of one of the four. So of one of these four kingdoms, and the best fit here is that this is going to be a Seleucid king, okay, who will come from the north. What direction will the goat travel? Or the horn, rather. One of them will come a rather small horn, which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east. That one's more difficult for me because given who I think this represents, I mean, what would be east of this area? Just desert, right? So if this is Antiochus Epiphanes, as I believe it is the best fit historically, we know that he came from the west and traveled east in the process of becoming king. Anyway, so he grows great toward the south, toward the east, toward the beautiful land, okay? So we're given some sense of what direction this threat would come from. This horn, and by the way, notice in verse 9, what adjective is used to describe the horn? Little. Mine says small. Now it grew exceedingly great, but there's a sense in which, in heaven's eyes, it never stops being small. This is not, by the way, not the same little horn from chapter 7. But this is twice now that kind of language is used of, and if we could note any common characteristics between this small horn and the one from chapter 7, what common characteristics does each have? They grow. They're aggressive. What do they do with this? They're proud. They boast of great things. They think of themselves as something great. Notice that this horn grows to the host of heaven, causes some of the host and some of the stars to fall to the earth. Stars is another image in prophecy used to refer to rulers. Trampled them down, but then notice verse 11. It even magnified itself to be equal with the commander of the host. And it removed the regular sacrifice from him, and the place of his sanctuary was thrown down. So you see that common, the horn in chapter 7 boasted of great things. They're not the same. It's not talking about the same king, but same characteristics. And again, why does God go to the trouble of using that adjective, small horn? We have to get this. Why go to the trouble to call it a small horn? Okay. What about God's people? How does that help God's people? This is a small horn. This is a little horn. In their eyes, In their eyes, how would such a ruler be seen? In the eyes of God's people who live under their thumb. How do God's people see them? They would fear them. Potentially, right? We can't do anything about him. And they would be right. On their own, they couldn't. So why does God call them a small horn? God's saying, I have this. That's worth, we have so much left to cover. But that, in my estimation, may be the most important takeaway for God's people today in this chapter. I've got this. And so on that basis, doesn't matter who wins an election. It just does not. All right. So here's this pompous small horn, and no matter what direction it goes up into the heavens, it's able to take some of the stars to the earth. It magnifies itself. And as you read this imagery, as you think about possible applications, when it starts talking about on account, verse 12, on account of transgression, the host will be given over to the horn along with the regular sacrifice. It will fling truth to the ground, perform its will, and prosper. Verse 13 asks the question, how long will the vision about the regular sacrifice apply while the transgression causes horror? What aspect of daily life of God's people is being impacted here? Temple service. Okay? Now, historically, there seems to be very little debate. Obviously, the Greek Empire here, and the first horn would represent Alexander. The four horns would be the division of his empire into four rulers. We've already talked about that. But then at about the year 175 BC, for about a period of a dozen years, there was a Seleucid king, so he would be a descendant of this line of kings from the north, named Antiochus Epiphanes. I'm blanking out. Curtis, what's the meaning of Epiphanes? God, the manifest one. It's almost a claim to deity, right? And then there was a play on that title, like Epimanes or something like that, where based on his manner, he came to be known by what was that? The crazy one. Yeah, he would just do odd things. So he kind of had a nickname. But Antiochus Epiphanes is the better title to know him by here in this chapter. And without getting into the history here, the detail here matches so much of what he did, desecrating the temple, defeating rulers in Israel, placing rulers, kind of controlling the priesthood according to his whims, lifting himself up to be equal with God, not just removing the regular sacrifice, but defiling the holy place. I read somewhere where he had a swine offered on the altar of burnt offering every month. On the day of the month, the number of the month, that's the number of his birthday. So I say, I didn't say that very well. If I'm born on the 21st, then every 21st, if his birthday was on the 21st, then every 21st of every month, he would offer a swine. And did other things like taking swine broth, and best thing I can describe it as is anointing, just splattering swine broth all around. Curtis, anything else? I hate to put you on the spot. Anything else about Antiochus Epiphanes that you think would merit a mention here?
Circumcise their children.
Okay. Yeah. There you go.
Idol
Sorry.
worship. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
By having idol worship, pretty well required by, like you say, herding swine through the streets of Jerusalem and offering them on the altar of Jehovah. So it
Yeah.
was he was a a terrible man as far as trying to defile their feeling about their own God and trying to exalt himself and to bring the Jews into a kind of a Greek way of thinking.
Yeah, turning them into pagans.
Right.
Refusing to let them possess a copy of the law, refusing to let them circumcise their kids, among other things. And so then in 164 BC, when he is eventually defeated and dies, I think it was in 164, the temple is rededicated, and I believe that's the feast referenced in John 10 in verse 22, the Feast of Dedication. We know it as the holiday Hanukkah, okay, the festival of the rededication. Okay, so what in terms of interpretation here in verse, well, let's just pick up in verse 15 since we're limited in time. There's so much here that Daniel doesn't understand. He wants to understand it. Standing before him was one who looked like a man. I take that to just simply be an angel. Simply about an angel. And I heard the voice of a man between the banks of the Ulai. He called out and said, Gabriel, we recognize that name, one of two angels named in the Bible, give this man an understanding of the vision. So Gabriel is going to provide comfort, understanding. Verse 18, Daniel sinks into a deep sleep, but he is touched and made to stand upright. And so verse 19 pertains to the appointed time of the end, which I take just to mean in the distant future. Okay? Daniel is going to be told to seal this up. I want you to think about how this is a comfort. This is pertaining to hundreds of years in the future, right? If you look at this, happens 175 BC. They're about 400 years upstream on the timeline here. That's the so-called years of silence, right? And yet, is God totally silent about that time? No, not at all. He has spoken about that time. And this is going to be very helpful to the people of God. And of course, I mean, who else would you pick but Daniel to write this down and make sure that it's preserved? Who else would you trust to do this? So he's told, we've read 20 through 22, verse 23, in the latter period of their rule, that's talking about the four kings of verse 22, when the transgressors have run their course, a king will arise, and this is the little horn here. Here are his characteristics: insolent, skilled in intrigue. Just go read some articles on Antiochus Epiphanes and study that for yourself. This is an apt description of him. His power will be mighty, but not by his own power. He will destroy to an extraordinary degree and prosper and perform his will. He will destroy mighty men and the holy people, and through his shrewdness, he will cause deceit to succeed by his influence. He will magnify himself in his heart. He will destroy many while they're at ease. He will even oppose the prince of princes, but he will be broken without human agency. Pause there. That means God is going to take care of him. The vision of the evenings and mornings, which has been told, is true, but keep the vision secret, for it pertains to many days in the future. And verse 27, we'd be remiss if we didn't point this out. The physical impact on Daniel. He was exhausted and sick for days. I'm just going to leave you to meditate on that. With reference to verse 26 refers back to verse 14. He said to me, for 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the holy place will be properly restored. Here's what you take away from that. Commentators have really struggled to understand where this 2,300 evenings and mornings would actually fit. There are some possibilities that have been suggested I'm not going to get into. But here's the point, I think, to take away from this. 2,300 is a finite number. God has established it. God knows what it is. And in day 2301, or evening or morning 2301, it's over. What is he saying? This small horn will reign for a period of time. It will seem like a long time. If you say, for the next 2,300 evenings and mornings, and you're thinking, wow. But he's saying it's limited, and then it will be over. Exactly when God says it will be over. All right. Lot more we could say. Daniel 9 for next week. It doesn't get any easier. We'll look at the